All right there, everyone. The mainstream media is stunned that Americans are rallying behind President Trump. That's right. We're going to take a look at the latest polls that show a surge of support for our commander-in-chief and why those same polls are showing a collapse in support for these left-wing activists disguised as journalists. I think you're going to absolutely love it. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. I certainly hope you're all safe and sound on this lovely Lockdown Tuesday. If this is your first time here at this channel, a warm welcome to you. We post 2 videos a day analyzing current events and some super awesome conservative trends so you can live in the present in line of even better things to come. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do, right? Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. You're going to absolutely love interacting with this online community of conservatives from all over the world. And speaking of interacting with fellow conservatives, we've got a very important message for all of you business owners out there. As you know, we look out for each other on this channel. And so if you own a business or if you know someone who has a small business and is really feeling the effects of this pandemic crunch, we have a great friend and a supporter of this channel who's here to help. Our good friend Brant Frost and his awesome team over at First Liberty. They're here to help get you one of their new emergency SBA payroll protection program loans so that you can keep your business going and your employees working. They're so awesome. They're one of us. And they're here to serve and help you during these trying times. So make sure to click on the link below and go to firstlibertyga.com. That's firstlibertyga.com. And as little as 24 hours, they can get you approved for a loan. Again, that's firstlibertyga.com. And make sure to tell them that Dr. Steve sent you. You'll be glad that you did. They'll take good care of you. Promise. All right, let's dive right in here. And New York Post has a great piece written by the Post editorial board, okay? And it's entitled Media Mystified as America Rallies Behind President Trump During Coronavirus Crisis. It's a good piece because it was put together by the whole of the editorial board there at the New York Post, who obviously recognize what's been going on of late among the left-wing activists disguised as journalists in the mainstream Marxist media, which we could now probably refer to as the pro-China media. The editorial board slams the blatant attempt by the mainstream media to take President Trump down over this coronavirus. They are hell-bent on getting the majority of the American people to blame President Trump and his supposed lack of preparedness and slow response on the high amount of infections and the rising death toll. The media is actively attempting this. They are deliberately trying to get the American people to blame President Trump for this pandemic. How else do you describe the absurd hysterics at the White House press briefings? The barrage of gotcha questions that serve one purpose and one purpose only, and that's to try to make President Trump look bad. That's its only purpose these questions serve. They're not reporters, they're hecklers. And so to the utter shock of these hecklers, these left-wing activists disguised as journalists, it's not working. And so the New York Times recently ran the headline, "Who are the voters behind Trump's higher approval rating?" And as the editorial board mocked, over at this New York Post with this piece, the New York Times might as well have had the headline, "Who could possibly think that Trump is doing a good job here? Who could possibly even consider that Trump is acting in a competent and responsible manner?" Since none of us hecklers at the New York Times thinks that. Who are these people? The New York Times does admit, though, through their cringed teeth, that Trump's approval ratings are currently at an all-time high. Their polls show him at 49%. And this, of course, was corroborated by a number of polls of late that all show a huge surge in support for Trump. The latest Gallup poll has Trump's approval numbers in the stratosphere during this whole coronavirus crisis. The poll found that Trump's approval rating for handling the crisis stands at an astonishing 60%. 94% of Republicans approve. 60% of independents approve. Even nearly 30% of Democrats approve. Trump's overall approval stands at 49%, which ties his highest approval rating from January this year. Now, this Gallup poll came out on the same day that a Monmouth University poll was released that showed that more Americans approve of President Trump's response to the coronavirus than the media's reaction to it. And this is what's driving the media so batty, so crazy. The Monmouth poll found that 50% of the public approved of President Trump's behavior during this crisis, while only 45% approved of the way the mainstream Marxist media has behaved, which is absolutely hilarious if you think about it. We noted in an earlier video that public trust in the media continues to erode during this crisis. According to Statista.com, 47% of Americans said that they do not trust the mainstream media's coronavirus information. The Monmouth poll is showing similar results, with 60% of Republicans and 52% of independents saying that the media has done a bad job in their coverage of the virus. So you have to understand the frustration here on the part of the mainstream pro-China heckler media. They're hell-bent on taking down Trump over this crisis. I mean, you probably saw The Atlantic ran a cover story a couple of weeks back entitled "The End of the Trump Presidency." And in many ways, they telegraphed precisely what the media narrative was going to be. But the one thing that these arrogant, narcissistic, left-wing activists disguised as journalists, these hecklers, didn't seem to consider was the possibility that more Americans would end up actually trusting Trump and his assessment of the virus pandemic over them and their assessment. The level of narcissism is so pervasive among these left-wing liberals in the mainstream Marxist media that they didn't even seem to once consider that more people could end up trusting Trump over them. But that's precisely what has happened according to these polls. As the media, constitutes this never-ending erosion in their support, these same polls are showing a massive surge in support of President Trump, who over the last couple of weeks, he was in earshot of a 60% approval rating. ABC, in partnership with Ipsos, conducted a poll a couple of weeks back that found 55% of Americans approved of the president's management of the crisis. And what was so significant with that poll is that it was an almost complete inversion, a reversal of what we had seen the previous week, when only about 43% approved Trump's handling of the pandemic, while 54% disapproved. So we've seen a massive surge in support, a shift in support over the last couple of weeks. And this ABC poll corroborated a Harris poll released a couple of weeks back that found that President Trump's overall approval rating had jumped 4 points from 49% to 53% in less than a week. Again, a very, very significant jump. That's his overall approval rating. In terms of how he's actually handling the crisis, his approval during that same time period, so we're talking a couple of weeks back, jumped 5 points from 51% to 56%. So we saw two independent polls with almost the exact same approval rating, and they're off from each other just by about 1 percentage point. And they both showed that President Trump, like 2 weeks ago, was in range of a near 60% approval in the midst of all this, which is a gigantic approval rating. Well, now with this latest Gallup poll that came out last week, we now see that President Trump has officially crossed that 60% threshold. Now, the significance of these polls for Trump's re-election prospects are gigantic. And we've talked previously in other videos about this thing called the primary model for election forecasts. It's going to be an important guide for us as we're going out towards November. It's a model used by the Stony Brook University professor Helmut Norpoth. It's known as the primary model, which, according to Norpoth's model, the popular vote winner in the primary always goes on to win the general election. And what's so interesting is that Norpoth bases such an observation by studying elections that go all the way back to 1912, which is the first time that presidential candidates had to win a number of primaries. And in each case, the candidate that was stronger in the primary went on to win the general election. And the model has a near perfect record in predicting presidential election outcomes. And so as a result, of course, Norpoth predicted rightly that Trump would win back in 2016. And that's because he recognized that while Hillary Clinton barely managed to squeak by the primary challenge from Bernie Sanders, Trump soundly trounced 16 of the Republicans' finest, earning more votes than any Republican candidate in history. Now, if you don't know, Norpoth ran the numbers for the 2020 election, and what he found that according to this election forecast model, Trump has a 91% chance of beating Joe Biden in November. And again, to keep this in perspective, back in 2016, Trump had an 87% chance of beating Hillary, again, according to this forecast model. Trump now has a 91% chance of beating Biden, and this primarily because of the early primaries. Biden, until the South Carolina primary, was considered politically dead. He was destroyed. He was trounced in Iowa. He was trounced in New Hampshire. Came in 5th, for heaven's sakes. He was trounced in Nevada. Whereas President Trump has been setting new records for an incumbent seeking re-election. Trump is basically getting 2 to 3 times the vote shares that Obama got back in 2012, which was the last time an incumbent ran for re-election. But here's the problem. If you go to the primary model website, there's a disclaimer. And the disclaimer is that due to the unprecedented nature of the coronavirus, Helmut Norpoth may have to change his prediction, especially in light of any possible crack in Trump's poll numbers. And so this is why Trump's approval ratings during this time are so important to me. If this model is so dead on accurate, I used it back in 2016 for my prediction. And if its prediction of Trump's reelection is actually being qualified based on a possible erosion of Trump's approval numbers through all this, then that ought to get our attention. However, I'm very thankful to report that Professor Norpoth has been reading the polls as well, which have only confirmed his original prediction. He is confirmed, based on this poll surge, that Trump does have a 91% chance of beating Biden. And of course, this wasn't supposed to be. As far as the mainstream Chinese Marxist media is concerned, their historical heckling, their so-called coverage of the president was supposed to bring him down. Unfortunately for them, their sense of self-inflated importance blinded them to the fact that more people end up trusting their president than the fake news that gets peddled on a daily basis from the mainstream Marxist media. Which means that 2020 looks like it will be every bit the shock for the left-wing liberal establishment as it was back in 2016. Now, before you go, you definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her latest embarrassing drunken rant. I think it is going to make your day. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.